It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Philips 279P1. The OSD is controlled by pressable buttons, and you can see they've got button labels at the front. There's also a little power LED, little pinprick style power LED, which glows white when the monitor is on, and it blinks white when it goes into a low power state. So signal to the system's lost, in other words. You can see the function of each button. You can't customize the buttons, they're all a fixed function. You can see, for example, they've got directional arrows. So the first button, when you're in the main menu system, that would be your back button. The second button there, which has the down arrow. Then there's the up arrow, up. And then it says OK, so that's the enter button. So that's how you'd select something in the menu or go deeper into the menu, that kind of thing. If you press the first button, when you're not in the main menu system, you can select one of the smart image presets. So the first one there, Easy Read, makes everything monochrome. All of these settings, actually, I'm not going to spend too long going through them, because all they do is they change settings in the OSD in the main menu system that you could change yourself anyway. So the second one there, Office, makes things overly sharp. That's the main thing I notice. Photo makes everything bright, very sharp, makes some changes to the color channels as well. So if I now go into the main menu system and I go to Picture, which is where your main adjustments are found. So for example, it increases the sharpness to 70. That's really the most noticeable thing for me. It's over sharp. Don't like this look at all, but you can just change that if you want. It also sets the color temperature to 65000K, which may or may not be 6500K depending on your unit. It wasn't quite there on my unit, but it wasn't miles off, I suppose. There's the movie setting. That makes things look cooler, and it increases the gamma, so it gives quite a cinematic look, and it even ramps up the sharpness filter further, it seems. Game, again, a strong sharpness filter, very over sharpened look, just makes different adjustments. Economy, that sets the screen to a fairly dim value, and if I go into Picture I should be able to see what that is. So it sets the brightness to 20, and it's called Economy because that means it'll draw less power. There's Low Blue Mode, and I'll go through these when I get to them in the main menu system. And the Smart Uniformity, that's uniformity compensation, digital uniformity compensation setting, which evens out brightness at different points of the screen, and that is explored in the written review. Well, there's Off, which is my preferred setting, and that just means you're going to be making whatever adjustments you want in the OSD. And if you select one of these, let's say Photo, and then you do decide to change something in the OSD, so let's say I want to reduce the brightness, and I'll turn Smart Response to Fastest, which I'd never advise using. I'm just doing this so it makes some clear changes. So I've decreased the brightness, set Smart Response to Fastest. You'll see it's still on Photo. If I go on to something else, Movie, you'll see that the Smart Response is now set to Fast, brightness is set to 100, so it's not using the changes I just made. If I go back to Photo now, you'll see that it's remembered the changes I made just for this Photo preset. Brightness at 85, Smart Response to Fastest. So if you like, you can make whatever changes you want with these presets, and you can have them as different sets of settings. So that's absolutely fine. There's no reason you need to use the defaults. For me, I'm happy though to just use Off. I use the same set of settings for everything, my test settings in the review. Set up the monitor properly and it should be good for all applications. That's the idea. If you press the second button on its own when you're not in the main menu system, you can select the input used by the monitor. If you press the third button on its own, you can control the power sensor. I find this a very strange thing to give a dedicated button to be honest. Most people, if they're using the power sensor, they're just going to have it set to one of these settings and then they're going to leave it like that. That's certainly how I'd do it anyway. It would be nice if you could reconfigure this button to something you might use more frequently, but that's how they've set it up, and I will show you the power sensor very shortly when I get to it in the main menu system. So the main menu system, power sensor, see, I did say very shortly. I like this set to 1. And what this power sensor does, you'll be able to see this blinking there. You can't see that to the eye, that's infrared, so the camera can pick that up, but your eye doesn't see that blinking. So what the sensor will do is, after a minute that nobody's been detected for, it will dim the screen significantly, so that will draw less power. And then if a further 2 minutes elapses, so 3 minutes in total, it will actually turn the screen onto standby. It'll enter a low power state, which will further cut the power consumption. Then it springs back to life very quickly when the user returns, So I found this very effective, set to 1. You can increase the setting. I've actually covered the sensor up to try and see if it will trigger the behavior whilst I'm actually sitting in front of the monitor talking to you about it, but it doesn't seem to have done that. So it doesn't seem to like the sensor being covered. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. Just wanted to say that I do like to use the sensor because I'm frequently making short trips away from my monitor. So I quite like the fact that it'll dim and then turn itself on to standby, then very quickly will spring back to life when I return. I do like the feature. Only thing is that for some reason, on my unit at least, if I set this anything above 1, it didn't work at all. So the idea here is that this will increase the scan range. So if you have a higher number, it will scan further out to try and detect the user. And that includes not just further away from the monitor, but more to the sides as well. For some reason, when I selected anything above 1, the sensor didn't work at all. So it doesn't matter if anyone was in the room or not. The monitor would always stay on. It would never dim or turn on to standby. So fortunately for me, a setting of 1 works just fine. I tend to sit 70 centimeters or so away from the monitor, but the setting you use, assuming the other settings are working properly for you, it will depend on not just how far away you're sitting, but also the clothes you're wearing. So the absorption of infrared changes for different colors of clothing, for example. So just have a play, see what works for you, but for me, the setting of 1 worked very nicely. Next, there's light sensor. That uses that same sensor suite, or perhaps a different sensor technically, but it's in the same area anyway, just to the left of that Philips logo. And what this does is it will allow the screen to adjust its brightness according to the ambient brightness in the room. I have to say I don't much like this setting for the same reason I don't generally like these kind of settings on monitors anyway. That's because everyone has their own preferences for brightness, and there's absolutely no way of you telling the monitor what your preferred brightness levels are for a given room lighting conditions or just anything in general. You can't set a limit or anything like that. I tended to find that the monitor was a little bit brighter than I'd like most of the time with this setting. Sometimes it was actually a bit dimmer than I'd like. So basically I just have my own preferences, and there's no way of me telling the monitor what those are. So I'd prefer to just set a static brightness. And you'll see that the brightness isn't grayed out, but if you do adjust this, the light sensor will promptly switch off. So you can't control brightness at the same time as using the light sensor. Even so, some users might still quite like this setting anyway. They might find the adjustments it makes agreeable, and that's fine. Low blue mode. So these are the low blue light settings, various different settings, 1 to 4. 4 is the strongest effect, 1 is the weakest. And these will significantly cut down the blue light output from the monitor. It will give a significantly warmer color temperature. There are also a few other changes it makes to the image. It doesn't decrease the green channel, so the image has a noticeable green tint, which I don't really much like, and your eyes don't tend to fully adjust to. Everyone's eyes are different, but I didn't fully adjust to the changes it makes to the image. I didn't find it as well balanced as some settings of this type. So there's actually an alternative low blue light setting which I prefer to use, which I'll come on to very shortly. But if you find the image fine with these settings, then by all means have a play with them. They are effective, especially the higher settings here. They do significantly decrease blue light output, and that's useful in the evening and the hours leading up to bed when you should be limiting your exposure to stimulating blue light, which is an alertness signal for your body and not something you want before you're trying to relax and go to sleep. Next is input. No prizes for guessing what that does. It lets you select the input used by the monitor. So there's HDMI 2 ports, 2 HDMI 2 ports, DisplayPort and USB-C. Next is picture. So this allows you to change that smart image preset which I showed you earlier. There's picture format, which is grayed out if you're using the native resolution, and also grayed out if you're using adaptive sync. This monitor doesn't officially support adaptive sync. This is all covered in the review. You can technically use G-Sync compatible mode with it. That will also grey this setting out. And actually, I tell a lie. It isn't grayed out because it's at the native resolution, because I'm at the native resolution now, and you can still select this, but it's not going to do anything if you're running at the native resolution. This is designed for non-native resolutions. It will change the scaling behavior. So you can see there is widescreen, 4:3 and 1:1. So widescreen will use all of the pixels of the monitor A 4:3 does actually enforce a 4:3 aspect ratio, so because I'm using a 16:9 resolution at the moment, everything's squished up, looks a bit weird. I'm now running the monitor at 2560 by 1440 or 1440p, WQHD, whatever you prefer to call it. I'm using the wide setting. You can see that all of the pixels are used. It uses an interpolation or scaling process. It's explored in the written review. If I change this to 1:1, that's the 1:1 pixel mapping function. So this will only use the pixels that are called for by the source resolution, and it will display a black border for the rest of the pixels. I've now set things to the full HD resolution. That's 1920 by 1080 or 1080p, whatever you want to call it. And you can see that is a very large black border. That's because it's only using 1920 by 1080 pixels. The rest of the pixels, the monitor has a lot more than that. They're just used up in that black border instead. But that's a perfectly respectable image in the middle in terms of the clarity and in terms of it not being distorted, not scaled, anything like that. Just very small indeed. And I know it looks very much overblown, the image on the camera. That's just because of the settings. It's automatically adjusting because of the large mass of black there. But to the eye, it would look more like a bit more like that, really. And it's now just turned power saving mode on because I'm actually quite far from the monitor recording this bit. So you might have seen that the screen just dimmed significantly then. So that's just what I was talking about before. I was trying to get it to do it by covering the sensor, but that didn't trick the monitor. It doesn't seem to like things placed directly in front of the sensor. So if you then get a bit close to the monitor, you see it very quickly springs back to life. Next, you've got your brightness control, your contrast control. There's also a sharpness control, and that is adjusted in increments of 10. I found the default of 50 fine, but I did like to increase it a bit when I was running a non-native resolution, as I explore in the interpolation and upscaling section of the written review. But you can adjust that according to your own preferences. Smart response, I like to have that set to fast. Again, this is explored in the review. You can set that to off, fast, faster, or fastest. So this is the pixel overdrive of the monitor, the grey to grey acceleration. Smart contrast, on or off, that's the dynamic contrast feature of the monitor. That's explored in the review as well, the written review in the contrast section. Gamma, different gamma settings, 2.2, which did, and these did actually correspond to what they should on my unit. It's very well tuned in that respect. So there's 1.8, 2.0, 2.2, 2.4, and 2.6. Pixel orbiting. Now this is a standard feature on Philips monitors. I can't remember the last time I used a Philips monitor that didn't have this feature, so it's not something that I'd worry about. It was actually turned off by default on this one. Sometimes it's turned on by default, but all this is designed to do is every now and then it will just shift the image by 1 pixel and then back to where it was. It does this very occasionally. I'm not sure on the exact interval here, but it doesn't do it very often. But what this is designed to do is it's designed to minimize image retention, and that isn't an issue I had on this monitor. I didn't have any image retention or burn-in, whatever you want to call it, temporary image retention. But if there was any on this monitor, I'd expect it to be very mild. I would expect it to clear up very quickly as well. But if you are having issues with that for whatever reason, then try turning the pixel orbiting feature on. Could help you. Audio, that allows you to adjust the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm headphone jack, or mute them instead. Then there's colour, and that allows you to change the colour channels yourself with user define, red, green and blue changed individually there, or you can have a preset colour temperature setting, various different settings there. Native, which is the same as setting the colour channels to 100 apiece, or there are various different K values. The 5000K setting, that's a nice low blue light setting. This is actually the preferred setting for me in the evenings. And it's very effective, very good at decreasing the blue light output, gives a warmer look to the image. But unlike the main low blue light settings of this monitor, it doesn't impart that strange green tint. It's not a strange green tint, it's actually quite common that settings of this nature would do that. But it's quite a strong green tint on this one, I have to say. But this completely avoids that, and it just gives a warmer look to the image, which I find a lot better balanced than the alternative low blue light setting. sRGB, that's the sRGB emulation setting, and that's explored in the review. User define, I've already gone through. Language, you can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. OSD setting, so you can change the horizontal and vertical position of the OSD on the screen. There's a transparency effect which you can change. You can enable that, make it stronger, depending on your preferences. I'm not really fussed about that either way. I'll just have that off quite happily. OSD timeout, so this is how long after the last button press before the OSD will automatically collapse in on itself, or you can just press that first button there a few times, the back button, to get rid of the OSD manually. Next is USB setting. That allows you to change the USB operating mode between USB 3.2 and USB 2.0. USB standby mode, so this will say if you want the USB ports to remain active and give you power and that kind of thing, even if the monitor is in standby. That means it's entered a low power state. It doesn't mean that you've turned the monitor off or anything like that, it just means it's entered its low power state. Having this left to on will mean that the standby power consumption is increased, even if you don't actually have USB peripherals connected, because it will keep those ports active, so that does draw a bit more power. So if you want to minimize power consumption and you're not using USB, or you are using USB but you don't want to use them when the screen is in a low power state, then just have this set to off, that's fine. Setup, quite interesting actually. Interesting that it does this, but it has a setting power LED which allows you to change the brightness of that power LED or turn it off. Very simple thing, but quite a lot of monitors actually don't have a setting like this, so this can be quite useful. So I had it set to 3, I'm not sure if that was the default, can't really remember. 4 is brighter, 0 is off completely, 1 is quite dim, 2 a little bit brighter, and then back to 3. So yeah, good flexibility there. I'm not really too bothered about the power LED myself either way, but some people do find it a bit annoying, so you can customize its brightness, quite good. Next is resolution notification. That'll just give you a little message on the screen when the monitor enters a non-native resolution to remind you what the native resolution is. Reset, which will reset everything to the factory defaults. And information, which displays some basic information including the model number, 279P1, the serial number, and also the resolution and refresh rate that's currently being used. And if you're using adaptive sync, as I said, this doesn't officially support adaptive sync, but you can kind of use it with G-Sync compatible mode, or I could with my RTX 3090, then the refresh rate displayed there will change in real time according to your frame rate. But do be aware of the significant caveats with adaptive sync with this model, which I mention in the review. And just to wrap things up, I'm going to show you SmartControl, which is Philips software, which can be used to control the OSD. It isn't comprehensive software, it is missing a lot of features that you would find on the OSD itself. You can see this feature here, for example. This is sort of one of the functions that it does. It allows you to rearrange windows, snap your windows into position, and if you press the little icon here, actually that just brings up SmartControl, but if you right click it, you can select display 1, you can change the pattern which it'll give you the windows, sort of arrangement you want to have. I'll show you that when I get to it in SmartControl itself, because those icons honestly are tiny because I'm not using scaling at the moment. Picture, so picture format, again from the OSD, you'll see that there's wide, 4:3, 1:1. There's also movie 1, movie 2 and 16:9, but these are grayed out, they don't apply to this monitor. So yeah, this software is a bit rough around the edges, to be honest. You can even use it on non-Philips monitors actually. Some of this functionality will work on other monitors as well. Brightness, that's something you can often set with other monitors, for example, using the software if you want to. It's pretty self-explanatory. Reset, which will reset that to, I was going to say the factory default, but it doesn't seem to do that. Maybe that doesn't do anything on this model. Contrast, you see it is a bit, as I said, a bit rough around the edges. Contrast control as well. Let's see. If I reset that, yeah, that resets that back to 50. Okay, so that reset will reset it back to what it was before you made any adjustments in the software. That's what it is. Resolution allows you to change the resolution and refresh rate. Next is color, so you can change the red, green and blue color channels. Black level, that's grayed out because this monitor doesn't have such a setting. You can change the gamma. You can change the smart image preset. It shows a load of things here which aren't actually available on this model. There was easy read and low blue modes for some reason. Okay, so that has them here. It's a bit confusing. It has them listed here and you can select them. It also has them listed over here where you can't select them. Very weird. But it does work. It does quickly adjust the preset. Eco power. So if you want to use this, you have to click the little power saving bit there, otherwise it's going to ignore anything you do here. You can have an idle timer. So I'm not sure how idle timer is different to power off. I don't use these settings. I haven't really tested them out myself, so I'm not sure exactly what they do. Except power off, I think this may actually turn the monitor off rather than just sending it into standby. So turning it off as if you've pressed the power button at the front of the monitor to turn it off. And I'll do that after a given amount of time in minutes. You can set that between, well, 0, which is disabled, and 100 minutes. You can also have a schedule, so it turns the monitor off at certain times or on certain days. So maybe idle timer actually just sends it onto standby, whereas power off turns it off as if you press the power button. I don't really know. Again, I haven't really tested this out. It's not something which I use myself. There's then setup. Multi-monitor, that just allows you to choose the monitor that you're adjusting here if you've got multiple displays connected to your system. There's audio, again, same as in the OSD. There's VGA, which isn't applicable on this monitor. Screen rotate, so you can have it automatically rotate for you when you rotate the screen into portrait. So if you're frequently changing between landscape orientation, as I have now, and portrait, you're pivoting the screen into portrait, that can be useful. You just have to have the SmartControl software running in the background and it'll do that for you, or you can manually rotate it to whatever you like. Reset, it's quite self-explanatory. Again, that's going to reset everything to the factory defaults. Information, there's quite a lot of information here. It's taken from the EDID of the monitor, the extended display identification data. So coming back to that other feature I mentioned, which allows you to rearrange windows and snap them to different points of the screen. I did think there was some way of doing that from the main application, but it seems there isn't, or for some reason I can't find it at the moment. So I guess it is going to have to be these tiny little icons that we deal with here. But you can see there are various different orientations you can have, or different arrangements, I should say, for windows, depending on your preferences. So now when I have a window open and I drag it around the screen, that grid comes up, so you can select which portion of the screen you want to put it in, and it will snap there. So that's really all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Philips 279P1. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.